By the end of this investigation, we will have reconstructed the incident from the first suspicious download to command and control, internal discovery, remote access, and the final outbound transfer. More importantly, every conclusion will come from a visible network record. The alert is only our starting point. The real question is whether the surrounding evidence supports one continuous incident or just a collection of unrelated events. This is a Max room focused on threat hunting and network forensics. The room estimates 60 minutes, but that is lab completion time, not a target for this walkthrough. I am going to slow down whenever a field changes the investigation and compress the repeated filtering once the pattern is clear. Task 1 is the case briefing. The opening line is short, a quiet transfer and a widening breach. We have been brought into THM Security Services, or TSS, and the room asks us to reveal our role before we begin. The active case is the silent transfer. It is marked as an active, high-priority investigation for Helios Software Group, and Lucas Vogel is the lead analyst. The situation report says Helios escalated suspicious encrypted outbound traffic from a developer workstation. A snort alert suggested possible command and control activity, and the firewall showed follow-on connections that did not match normal development traffic. That gives us an incident report, not a finished conclusion. The company has isolated the workstation, but it still cannot explain how the activity started, whether the host was used for internal movement or whether data left the network. One beginner mistake here is to treat 2241 as the packet timestamp we must search for. It is the escalation time in the case briefing. The first investigation question gives us a separate evidence pivot at 0347 UTC. Those timestamps describe different parts of the case, so I will not force them into one clock. That sentence is the method for the entire room. An alert name can suggest a hypothesis, but it cannot prove the full behavior. We need to correlate independent records and keep confirmed network activity separate from assumptions about intent. The mission has 5 parts. Confirm whether the alert represents real C2 activity. Identify the workstation and external infrastructure. Reconstruct what happened before and after the suspicious connection. Determine whether activity reached another internal host. Finally, confirm whether data was transferred out and estimate the exposure. Lucas Vogel is the threat hunt lead, and we are the assigned analyst. That is enough orientation. The other Operations Hub tabs add company background, but they do not change the investigation, so I am returning to the room. Task 2 provides a forensic workstation with Wireshark, T-Shark, Zui, Zeek command line tools, and standard terminal utilities. The official lab stores its evidence under /home/ubuntu/capstone. The evidence bundle contains the snort alerts, Zeek logs, the packet capture, the FortiGate traffic log, and local reference material. For this recording, I copied the same investigation files to the Kali virtual machine. That changes only the local working path. It does not change any value inside the evidence. The Zeek folder is our structured view of the traffic. The connection log tells us who communicated with whom. The DNS log maps names to addresses. The HTTP log describes requests and responses. The SSL log contains the supplied TLS metadata and JA4 values. The files log links transfers to file names, byte counts, and hashes. The notice log records detection-oriented events. Before filtering, I want to establish one detail about Zeek logs. They are tab-separated files with comment lines at the top. The header, beginning with hash fields, defines the position of every column. When I use awk, $3, $5, or $22, refers to those verified column positions, not to a guess. The origin fields describe the side that initiated the connection. The response fields describe the destination side. That distinction becomes important when we decide whether a workstation downloaded a file or sent one out. All right, my little boo, let's check the questions. The first question gives us a time pivot and asks for an internal source address. I will start with the detection log because that is the smallest file and the closest source to the wording of the question. The alert occurred at 034722, so I will grep it from the snort log. It shows an internal source, connecting from source port 51088 to an external address on destination port 443. The alert label says, possible Cobalt Strike beacon activity. I am not accepting that product label as proof. What I care about is the stable network fact, the source host, and the external destination. Now I want to know whether this was a single connection or a repeated pattern. To verify that this was a repeated pattern rather than a single alert, I'll open the packet capture in Wireshark and filter for traffic between the two identified endpoints. You should be familiar with these basic queries, so I'm not going to explain it for you, little mammal. Let's copy this as IP source. Now copy this as destination. And add the port number too. The repeated traffic supports the host correlation. It still does not prove every claim in the alert signature, but it confirms that the same internal workstation repeatedly contacted the same external server on port 443. So the first answer is 10.14.30.88. Now we work backward. We know the compromised workstation and the C2 destination. The next question is, what reached the workstation before the beaconing began? The HTTP log is useful because it records the requester, the server, the request method, the host field, and the URI. I will list the earliest requests from the compromised workstation and keep the timestamps visible. So I'll just copy my pre-made command for this one. This awk command treats the Zeek log as tab-separated data, skips the header lines, and keeps only requests originating from the compromised workstation. It then prints the timestamp, endpoints, destination port, request method, host, and URI, while limiting the output to the first 10 rows. The first relevant row is different from the later check-ins. The workstation requested an executable looking path from 194.165.16.78 over port 80. That gives us the delivery address, but the question asks for the domain. So I am pivoting from the address into DNS. I am looking for an answer field containing that delivery IP. So let me copy my pre-made command once again. By the way, you can find all my used stuffs in the description. This command searches the DNS answer field for the delivery server's IP address, then prints the timestamp, requesting host, queried domain, and matching DNS response. This row ties the compromised workstation to the domain cdn-updates.microsoftservice.net and resolves it to the same server used for the download. The name is designed to look familiar, but I do not need to make an ownership claim to answer the question. The important evidence is the chain. The workstation resolved this name. The answer pointed to 194.165.16.78, and the subsequent HTTP request downloaded the file from that address. So the delivery domain is cdn-updates.microsoftservice.net. The next question moves from infrastructure to the actual transferred object. Zeek's files log is the right source because it records transfer direction, file name, observed byte count, and SHA value. One common mistake is to search the files log for the compromised host and grab the first hash without checking direction. Here we need the object transmitted by the external delivery server and received by the workstation. Now that we know both delivery endpoints, I am moving to files.log because it records the transferred object's file name, observed size, and hash. Let me copy once again one of my pre-made commands. This command keeps only files sent by the delivery server to the compromised workstation, then prints those three fields. The file name is winservice patch 4891.exe, and Zeek observed 1,800,000 bytes. The hash starts with 7F3B and ends with 8F90. The complete value remains on screen, so we do not risk changing a character while speaking it. A hash is an identifier, not a malware verdict by itself. What it proves here is that we can refer to this exact transferred object consistently across the investigation. We already know the two endpoints. Now the question asks for the workstation's source port on its first C2 connection. Once again, I copy my pre-made command for it. I am using http.log because it contains the repeated C2 check-in requests with the timestamp and both connection ports preserved in each row. This command isolates traffic between the compromised workstation and the known C2 server on port 443. Then prints the fields needed to identify the earliest source port. Source and destination ports are easy to swap when reading Zeek. The destination port is 443 because that is the service side. The changing high port belongs to the workstation. I will keep the timestamp in both port fields in the output, then take the first row in chronological order. The first row starts at this epoch timestamp. The workstation is the origin host, and its origin port is 51,000. The destination is the C2 server on 443. The following rows use 51,001, 51,002, and continue upward. That sequence supports an automated repeated pattern, but the answer is specifically the first source port, 51,000. Alrighty, let's check our next question. Okay, review the TLS activity between the compromised workstation and the C2 server. JA4 is a fingerprint derived from properties of the client-side TLS handshake. It is useful as a pivot because infrastructure addresses can change, while a client implementation may keep a recognizable handshake profile. It is not a universal malware label. Different software can share characteristics, and one client can change its fingerprint. So I want to use it with the surrounding evidence, not as a standalone verdict. The supplied SSL log contains the source, destination, TLS version, certificate validation status, and JA4 value. I will filter it to the compromised workstation and C2 server. So again, I paste my pre-made Commanderino. And as I said before, I am using the SSL log because this question asks for a TLS client fingerprint. And this is where Zeek records the handshake metadata and JA4 value. The command isolates connections between the compromised workstation and the known C2 server, then prints the endpoints, ports, TLS version, validation status, and fingerprint for the first 10 rows. Thought it is worth a repeat, just to be sure. Every displayed C2 row uses TLS version 1.3, reports a self-signed certificate, and carries the same JA4 value. The validation field and the JA4 field describe different things. The self-signed result relates to the certificate chain. The JA4 value describes the client handshake. Their combination is interesting because it repeats on the already correlated C2 path. For comparison, I will reduce the entire SSL log to its unique validation and fingerprint pairs. So copy the command again. This command prints the certificate validation result and JA4 value from every SSL record, then removes duplicate pairs so we can compare the distinct patterns directly. The surrounding legitimate-looking TLS records use the first pair, while the C2 path uses the second. That makes the anomalous fingerprint a clean investigative pivot. The answer is the JA4 value ending in 674 FD9, shown in full on screen. I hope you appreciate the fact that I did not do a 6-7 joke. We have now established the foothold side of the timeline. A file reached 10.14.30.88, and that host began repeated check-ins to 194.165.16.56. Let's roll to our next question, my overweight friend, where we want to know whether the activity stayed on that workstation. After C2 was established, how many unique internal destination IP addresses did the compromised workstation contact during its SMB discovery activity? SMB normally uses destination port 445. The important word in this question is unique. Counting every connection row would overstate the number of hosts, because one destination can appear more than once. I also want to preserve the sequence. So let's check the command. I am using con.log because it records each network connection with its endpoints, ports, and timestamp, even when no higher-level protocol details are available. This filter keeps connections from the compromised workstation to SMB port 445, then prints the first 10 timestamps and destination addresses. If you remember from before, the first C2 row began at epoch timestamp 1763083.380. The SMB rows begin later at 1763086500. So this activity follows the established check-in pattern in the supplied timeline. Now I want to turn these connection records into an exact count of unique destinations. So let's check out our new pre-made command. The aux section skips Zeek's header lines, keeps only traffic from the compromised workstation to destination port 445, and prints only the destination IP from each matching row. The same host may appear in several connections, so sort-u orders the addresses and removes every duplicate. The final T command does two things at once. It keeps the complete deduplicated list visible on screen, while saving that exact same list to a temporary file called smb-destinations.txt. This means the evidence we inspect and the data we count are identical. At this point, each line in the saved file represents one unique internal destination, not one individual connection attempt. To answer the question, I can now count the lines in that file with WC-L. WC-L reports the number of lines in the file. Because we deliberately created the file with exactly one deduplicated destination IP per line, its line count is also the number of unique systems contacted during the SMB activity. The result is 23. This confirms broad SMB discovery across 23 internal destinations. It does not prove successful authentication to each system. A connection attempt to port 445 is enough for the discovery count, but it is not the same as opening a share or moving laterally. So the answer is 23 unique internal IP addresses. The next pivot is Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDP. Its standard destination port is 3389. This answer needs a direct connection record. A later file transfer from another server can suggest where the attacker moved, but it cannot substitute for evidence of the RDP flow itself. The FortiGate log gives us the source, destination, service, action, timestamp, duration, and byte counts in one row. So we just go back to our good old grep command, where I grep the source IP with the destination port from the FortiGate traffic log. This is the direct evidence we needed. At 0222, the compromised workstation opened an accepted RDP session to 10.14.0.12. The session lasted 420 seconds and exchanged substantial traffic in both directions. Network telemetry confirms the session. It does not tell us which account authenticated or what appeared on the remote desktop. I will keep that boundary clear. So, with all that said, the destination IP is 10.14.0.12. Our active internal host now changes. Review the DNS activity originating from the RDP destination. Which domain did the server resolve immediately before the large outbound transfer? Up to this point, most filters focused on the original workstation. This question explicitly tells us to pivot to the RDP destination, 10.14.0.12. A very common investigation mistake is to keep reusing the old source IP after a lateral movement event. That would hide the exfiltration chain because the next DNS request originates from the server, not from the workstation. So, with all that said, I'm starting with dns.log. This log connects the requesting host to the domain it queried and the IP address returned in the answer. The filter skips the metadata lines beginning with a hash sign and keeps only DNS records originating from 10.14.0.12. It then prints the timestamp, source IP, queried domain, and returned answer. There is one DNS record from this server. It resolved backup.corpfilesync.com to 185.213.154.201. The wording says immediately before, so I want to verify the timing instead of relying only on the order of the log entries. Zeek stores the time as an epoch value. The date command treats the number following the @ sign as that epoch timestamp. -u converts it to UTC, and the final format string produces a readable date and time. I am moving to FortiGate traffic log because the firewall record gives us the connection time, destination port, duration, and byte counts in each direction. The grep pattern keeps only a line where 10.14.0.12 is the source and the IP returned by DNS is the destination. The outbound transfer began at 0342, exactly 60 seconds after the DNS resolution. It lasted 480 seconds, and the internal server sent 312 million bytes, while receiving only 1,200 bytes. That timing and direction are what make the DNS row relevant, so we can be pretty sure that the answer is backupcourtfilesync.com. We have the connection and its byte count. The question tells us, identify the archive transferred from the internal server to the external endpoint. What is its SHA hash? Now we need the file level record that names the archive and provides its hash. Again, direction matters. This time the transmit host must be the internal server, and the receive host must be the external endpoint. That is the reverse of the initial dropper transfer. We have already confirmed the internal server, the external endpoint, and the size of the outbound transfer. Now I want to identify the exact file associated with that connection, so I am moving to Files log. Unlike the firewall log, this records file-level details such as the file name, detected file type, observed size, and cryptographic hash. The filter skips the metadata lines, then keeps only file records sent from 10.14.0.12 to 185.213, 154.201. From that matching record, it prints the file name, MIME type, transfer direction, observed and total byte counts, and the SHA 256 hash. The archive is Q4 Finance Backup 2025.zip. Its recorded size is 312 million bytes. That exactly matches the sent byte value in the firewall record, connecting the file level evidence to the outbound network connection. The hash begins with a 3F8 and ends with F5A6. This confirms that the identified archive left the internal server for the external endpoint. The network evidence does not reveal the archive's uncompressed contents, so I can confirm the transfer and its exposure size, but not every document stored inside it. So let's just copy our newly achieved SHA and check out our next question. The final question brings us back to the C2 channel and asks for its application layer content. What command did the attacker issue to the compromised workstation? Before extracting that command, I want to resolve one detail in the evidence. The SSL log assigns TLS metadata and a JA4 fingerprint to these connections, but the packet capture also contains readable HTTP requests and JSON responses. Are we looking at separate sessions? The Zeek connection identifiers let us check that directly. The first filter isolates the initial connection by its source port, 51000, and the C2 destination. It prints the Zeek UID alongside the HTTP method, host, and request path, giving us an identifier we can compare across logs. Now I will apply the same source port and destination filter to SSL.log. This time, the output keeps the UID, TLS version, certificate validation result, and JA4 value. These are not separate connections in the supplied logs. The same Zeek UID and source port appear in both records. The packet capture contains readable HTTP content for the connection, while SSL.log associates TLS metadata with it. The evidence bundle does not explain whether this is a decrypted analytical view or a synthetic lab construction. I therefore will not claim that I decrypted TLS, and I will not treat the records as different sessions. For question 5, the requested JA4 value came from SSL.log. For this question, the requested application content comes from the packet capture. Port 443 is normally associated with HTTPS, but the port number alone does not prove that every captured payload is encrypted. Here, we can inspect the readable application data directly. The capture contains repeated responses, so opening each stream individually would not help us isolate the command efficiently. The strings utility extracts printable text from the binary capture. grep-o returns only JSON objects matching the command response structure, and sort-u removes repeated copies so that each distinct response appears once. Most responses contain an empty command field, which is consistent with heartbeat-style check-ins. One response contains a populated value, D2HV, capital Y, capital W, 1P. That value is base 64 encoded. Base 64 is encoding, not encryption, so the next step is to decode the value and inspect the underlying text. The first printf sends the encoded value to the decoder without adding an unwanted line break. Base 64-D performs the decoding, and the final printf adds a clean new line after the result. The decoded command is, "Who am I?" On a compromised workstation, this command returns the user identity under which the process is running. It is a simple way for the operator to determine the security context of the current foothold. The room asks only for the issued command, so the final answer is, "Who am I?" We can now reconstruct the incident without relying on the alert name. The workstation 10.14.30.88 resolved the delivery domain, connected to 194.165.16.78, and downloaded WinService patch EXE. That workstation then began repeated check-ins to 194.165.16.56 on port 443. The first connection used source port 51,000, and the supplied SSL log associates this path with the self-signed certificate and a distinct JA4 fingerprint. Inside the check-in protocol, the application content reveals the command, "Who am I?" After the C2 activity began, the workstation contacted 23 unique internal systems over SMB port 445. The attacker then moved from the compromised workstation to 10.14.0.12 through an accepted RDP connection on port 3389. That server resolved backup.corpfiles-sync.com to 185.213.154.201. 60 seconds later, it sent a 312 million byte zip archive to that external endpoint. Together, the network evidence supports initial delivery, repeated command and control behavior, SMB discovery, an accepted RDP pivot, and a large outbound archive transfer. It does not prove the phishing method, the credentials used for RDP, or the uncompressed contents of the archive. Those conclusions would require endpoint, identity, or file system evidence that this room does not provide. That boundary is part of good threat hunting. We should be confident about what the network proves, specific about what it suggests, and honest about what remains outside the available telemetry. If this walkthrough helped, save this investigation pattern. Start from the alert, identify stable endpoints, work backward to delivery, then move forward through C2, discovery, lateral movement, and transfer. The same structure works well beyond this room. The silent transfer is complete. We did not just collect 10 answers. We built one defensible timeline from separate network artifacts, and we kept every conclusion tied to visible evidence. If this vid helped you to learn something, please consider to like, sub, and comment about your methods. Bye-bye.